Welcome to this year's LALIFF, Los Angeles Latino International Film Festival. I am excited to have these three talented writers for a conversation about screenwriting for TV and film. My name is Jamilla Webb, and I am the creator and founder of First 15, which is a monthly reading series that connects Black and Brown writers with professional actors for a lively table read before a panel of established industry writers who offer feedback to move the script forward. And now our lovely panelists will introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Katie Davila. I'm a writer and director of now features and television, which is pretty cool. So I just wrote, I had the pleasure of writing Emergency, which is in theaters and on Amazon Prime now. So go check it out. And yeah, I directed and co-wrote a short that was nominated for an Oscar this year. We could talk about that, I guess, if you want. Yeah, so that's me. I'm from Los Angeles. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Roche Jeffrey. I'm a huge fan of KD. Uh, we did a writing fellowship a few years ago, so that's how we know each other. But I'm a TV writer primarily, and I dabble in features. And I've written a short that went somewhere, and directed and wrote a short that went somewhere else. Excited to be here to talk about all things film and fun.
And I'm Ben Smith. I'm primarily a TV writer, TV comedy mostly. And most recently, I've been working on Only Murders in the Building. And I am very excited to be here and to talk about all these things. I wrote and directed a short a few years ago, but yeah, most of my expertise or experience is in TV space.
Amazing, amazing, you all. So you all have some really interesting backgrounds and have all dabbled in, writing shorts. And so I'm just curious, how did you get started in the industry? Katie,
Sure, I can start. I don't know, man. How do you get started in the industry? It's cliche, I guess, to say, but it's such a different path for everyone. My family had no connection to the industry at all, so I came here. It's funny because like I'm from Los Angeles, but I feel like when you're from when you're not from like the Hollywood side of town, it's like it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. I had no idea how the industry worked at all. And so when I decided I was going to work in film, I had a background in writing prose, and I mean, meaning like I wrote fan fiction. That was my first experience writing for an audience, was writing fan fiction. And
tell
like,
us more about what?
oh my God. Yeah, so I wrote a lot of fan fiction. I wrote video game fan fiction. I wrote Harry Potter fan fiction. It's funny because like I feel like I was very into writing video game fan fiction, but the stuff that did really well was Harry Potter fan fiction. There was just a built-in audience. And when you're like a teenage girl, no one wants to read your original shit. No, no, but people are like, oh, okay, cool. Like it's really hard to get anyone to read your stuff. But when you're writing fan fiction, you have people literally like demanding more. It's a very, you get feedback, you get people like you can get beta readers, you can get people like giving you notes on your material. It's a very, I mean, people kind of mock fan fiction, but I think as a writer, especially if you're writing like television, it's a really good like master class in learning to write in someone else's voice, learning to be like write episodically and try to like get people hooked and like want to see the next installment. It's like, so anyway, I think fan fiction was actually very educational for me as a young writer. And I was just doing it because I loved it and I loved entertaining people with these stories. Um, and I had that background, which is not really considered like a real thing. And I went to grad school for film school, and I feel like once you go to film school, they like kind of toss you out into the world like on your own. Like I didn't feel prepared at all for knowing how the industry really worked. Like I felt like I had a mastery, more of the, not mastery, but like I had a grasp on like the structure and like how to write scripts, but in terms of how to market yourself and like pitch, I really had no idea how that worked until I was thrown into it. And so I was in a couple of fellowships. I was in the Universal Fellowship, and then Roche and I were both in Film Independence Project Involved program, which was really great. And we both made shorts in that program, and you know that was, I think, making shorts. And I'll kind of try to be concise, but like shorts are so important. Like you come here to make things, and you as a screenwriter, you can fall into the danger of writing scripts, and like you're writing all these scripts and you have like a portfolio, but you're sending them out and they're like a pile of, it's just ending up in a pile of scripts. But if you make stuff, like people are lazy and they hate reading, and so making stuff was so important. And unfortunately people hate reading. So you know, making stuff was so important. And I think, you know, writing that short really helped launch things. Like I had already had agents and stuff, but making something that people could see that was produced was, it helped me get my first staff job on a television show. And then like the feature that just got released is you know, an adaptation of that short. So shorts. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I mean, my career kind of, I have two kind of starting points. I think I was staffed as a writer before I made my first short. And so how I got my start really was hustling, which is kind of an extension of what Katie's saying too. It's just like making stuff, doing stuff, showing up. You know, when I first moved to LA, I had friends who would be like, "Oh, I'm making a short," and I didn't care what kind of camera they were using. I was gonna show up and like PA and be on set and study and observe. And I think that's really key, like for me, in terms of how I got my start, was just like moving to LA and just meeting people and doing stuff. And then eventually what ended up happening was I started also applying to everything that made sense, that didn't feel like it was a scam from Craigslist. And
Yeah.
so ultimately, like, you know, I got into a couple of programs like Project Involved, KD. And to this day, I think I've been in like 7 fellowships or something like that. I still apply to them if they're relevant to where I am in my career. I think they're so helpful. And sometimes you may not see like exactly what the connection is to like where you are in your career, but somehow there was somebody you met or something you learned or something that happened along the way in those programs that like really, to me, I think helped to build my career. So for me, I got my start through PAing and like being on sets, and then writing whenever I could. And I got into this program called, I had a writing partner at the time. And we got on this list called We for She, and it was the best pilots written by women, starring female protagonists. And we didn't even get on the top 10, we were in the honorable mention. And from that one list, we got our first staffing gig, our first agent, and our manager. And the funny thing was, I had no idea what it was. When somebody said it to me, I was like, I don't know, but I trusted the person. So I applied. And I think that was also like the key to my early success, was just like trusting and going out there and putting myself out there.
Okay, I got into TV. I think I grew up in Massachusetts and I had no awareness of this industry at all. And I even remember like a distinct moment, like in teenage years, like discovering that someone wrote like a Disney movie, and that was kind of like there was a cognitive dissonance in that, even because I'm like, you mean Walt Disney didn't write that, or like it wasn't a story that always existed. So there was like a very, it just, I don't know, this whole world felt very foreign to me. But my kind of like background in these arts were like, I would do improv comedy a lot in high school and in college. And I would, you know, my friends and I would always do films in school for like, oh, you have to write a paper or a group project and like do a play in class. And we're like, how about instead we make a movie and like do a lot more work, but it's a lot more fun. So that was always like a part of my life, was like the storytelling. But it wasn't until college that I kind of like realized there was a career, and I'm really happy I did. And so I came from that improv comedy background, which is very collaborative, which is different than fanfic, obviously, which I want to talk to you all about this, Katie, at some point. But I think it also like instilled these things, which was important for TV writing, of like, it's all collaborative, can't have ego, you have to like roll with the punches, it's additive. And I loved that environment. So I came out to LA and I kind of got my start. a lot of my friends from college moved out here together. And so there's kind of a little bit of built-in community, and just started kind of like meeting people and submitting for jobs. And I will get into all this stuff later, I'm sure, but like getting reps and all that stuff was kind of just like slowly migrated westward, and was, I don't know, energized to kind of discover that this job even existed.
So it sounds like, all of you all pretty early on, you knew you wanted to enter into this field, like, around college, maybe even, no, Roche, you.
I mean, I kind of, but I didn't really know about writing. I wanted to be in entertainment, but I didn't know what concretely I wanted to do. So
Okay.
it wasn't until Shonda Rhimes that I was like, oh, there's a writer and then there's a Black person who does this. That's when became clear to me, but it wasn't like something that I specifically knew that I wanted to do.
Well, I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, mention that, Roche. Oh, sorry, go for it, Katie.
I was just gonna say, like, similarly, I feel like it is really funny to say that, like, there's a moment where you realize that TV shows and movies are written, and you're like, wow, like, that didn't just spontaneously occur with the actors just doing stuff. Like, I don't know, like, I definitely didn't think of Hollywood as a place for me. I think part of it's for the same reason of, like, you don't see very many most of the people that you see are like, you see like Steven Spielberg, like you see George Lucas. It's like kind of older white men in ball caps, like, and I didn't really see myself as like any of those people. And my family is very much like the, I guess, stereotypical, like, my like Latino father being like, get a real job. Like, that's not a real job. So anyway, that was just, agreeing that it's interesting just to see. Sometimes it takes seeing like a role model, like, you're like, oh wow, I guess I could do that too. Maybe I should try.
Was there a role model for you, Katie? Because
Um, Weirdly, um, my path was weird, I guess. So mine was more of a teacher who like, was a role model for me. Like, so she was in my undergrad. There wasn't really much of a film program. There was creative writing, and she was the one person who taught a screenwriting class. And she was the one who basically took me aside and was like, "Look, you could try to do this for real. Like, I think you could actually give it a shot." And I was in the process of applying to the CIA at the time, which was funny. That's my fun fact, is the CIA tried to recruit me. I studied Arabic, and I was, I think that it's really cool to study things if you're, if you're gonna be a filmmaker or a storyteller, to study things that are not film. Like, if just because then you have so much to draw from. So, but anyway, so it's like I didn't end up using. I studied military history and guerrilla warfare and just like the tragedy of everything that's happened in that region, which is, um, I was pursuing that sort of thing, and I realized that I could give this a shot, because this is always the thing that I loved doing, but never really thought of it as a real career. Yeah, until a teacher told me that I should try. And I was always a person who was like, if my teacher gave me a gold star, I was like the happiest person in the world. So that meant a lot to me, I guess.
I can relate to that, Katie.
Yeah.
Ben, what about you? Did you have role models, or was there someone you saw on TV or film that you were like, oh, okay, they look like me, or I want to do that?
I think if anything, like the role models were the people at school with me who were like 2 or 3 years older than me, who like when you're that freshman or sophomore, you're like, this is the coolest, funniest person in the world. And as I was saying, like when I went to college, when I went there, I was going to do international relations, government type stuff. But just like always do improv on the side, because it was like, those where I met all of my favorite friends. Um, but it was kind of like those people who were saying like, oh, we're going to try to be professional comedy writers, and maybe like similarly like kind of tapping me of being like, and we think you have it too, or like getting their validation of like, we think you're funny, and that's like this older person who wants to hang out with you, and they're pursuing this dream. It very much opened the door of like, great, like, yes, if you say that I'm allowed to, and I don't have to kind of like pursue all these jobs that I genuinely did want to do. And also my parents were very excited about me doing. Like those all kind of got put in the back seat with the promise to my parents of like, I can always go back to grad school in a couple of years if this thing doesn't work out. But yeah, I think it was kind of my peers who were the ones that I most admired. And when I saw them following this path and them encouraging me was what I needed.
Beautiful. So you all each had someone either you knew or someone from afar who you admired that actually got you into this. So now we want to dive into it, right? Some of you did fellowships, you on lists that help you get your reps. I want to know, how did you get your reps, and did that lead you to your first writing gig, or did your first paid writing gig lead you to your reps? So what was your first paid writing gig, and how did you get representation?
My situation was what I said earlier. I applied to this We for She thing. I got on the list along with my former writing partner. And ultimately, we simultaneously got representation and staff from that. And what's funny is like that situation is very unique. I haven't heard of anyone else getting on the list and having that happen. And so I always say like, you just don't know what it's gonna be, how the rep's gonna come, and when you're gonna get staffed. But that's what happened with us, is it all kind of happened off of this one list, this one script. It was also the right time. I think we were entering the business at a time where people were looking for young Black voices. And so we just happened to be, we're like, hey, we just happened to be at the door when they were looking for us. So it kind of worked out.
I was like, sorry, I was reps and then first paid job. And I think I kind of got representation. I think I'm very glad. I was too ignorant of how hard of and stressful process should be, like, and is. Like, I think there was some naivety of like coming out here, like kind of like looking for a first job, like let's meet builders. The energy hadn't like sunk in yet, of like the daunting task of kind of like starting in this industry. And so I think I was I wasn't nervous enough, and I'm glad for that. Actually, I wasn't like in my head too much, and I was just kind of like going with the flow and meeting people. And the way I got reps and was through like introductions. And it's kind of like the most general thing that I often pass on is that obviously reps are always looking for new clients and talent to work with and exciting people to partner with. But I feel like often they want someone to kind of do that first round of vetting for them, for them, someone to come to them that they already know, to be like, you should read this person who I love and is great. And so in my case, there were a couple people who had read my work and either were like professional friends with some of these reps, or like back in the day, like, oh, we went to high school together, I'll forward along your material. Like, it's not a big imposition on me. And so it was kind of like on the generosity of some of my friends and people I met who were kind enough, like truly to make introductions, and they kind of got like passed around these agencies or management companies until there was someone who was willing to work with me. And I don't know if my reps would characterize it differently, but like my view of them is that they were like younger reps also kind of like getting their first clients. And the romantic story I feel like is like we were all kind of like starting out together, and I'm still with the same people 10 years later. And there's like this, like we've all risen together and we've been together. But I think it was the generosity of people passing stuff along who vouched for me. And then I think kind of happening to come across the desks of people who were like willing to take on a young, inexperienced client because they were also trying to like get their start, and they responded to my writing. And so got the reps, and they kind of submitted me around for back when network staffing season was the big time of year. In 2013, I staffed on this show called Trophy Wife on ABC. And so that was my first writing job because of them.
Yeah. My reps, it is so funny because there really is no like straightforward way of getting them. So I got mine through a weird channel of, I applied on a whim to a smaller festival screenplay competition, the Nantucket Film Festival, just because I thought they had a cool prize. The prize was like it was cool. It was like you got money, but you also got like a month at an art colony. I was like, cool, like I'll just try. And then I won. And like the judge, one of the judges that year happened to be Franklin Leonard, who runs the Blacklist. So I mean, you know, basically he reached out and was like, hey, I liked your script. Do you have reps? And then I was like, no. And he was like, I'll send it to my people I know at CAA. And so I like got repped based off of that. And I was simultaneously, I'd just gotten into the Universal Fellowship. And it was funny because like I didn't get, like I already had reps when I was in that program. So usually those fellowships, sometimes they'll kind of help you try to meet people. Um, and I think that there's this kind of misunderstanding that like once you have reps that means you've won. But in a lot of ways, I think I realized that you have to have the right reps. And sometimes the first reps are not always the right reps. I had one person on my team that I really, really liked, and I stuck with her when she moved. And like the other reps were, they're probably great people, but like I think that when, especially when if you're a woman, or if you're if you're a person who's diverse, you can fall into the category of you know, kind of you get put in a box of like your identity box. And I think it's really important to make sure that you have a rep that understands what you want to do and doesn't just put you up for jobs that are that box. Like, because I remember I had this moment of realization where I was like, they sent me this story that, you know, it wasn't a bad thing to like to adapt. It was like they sent me this thing to adapt, and it was like about like illegal immigration with like meth addiction, and it was the most depressing thing I'd ever read in my life. And I was like, I write things that are kind of darkly comic, like I don't know, darkly comic thriller, like I don't know, more like a, like people say like Get Out kind of vibes. And it was, this was like melodrama. I was like, what? I remember really genuinely being like, why would they send this to me? Like, I'm trying to think. I was genuinely trying to be like, I'm trying to understand. And then I realized, I was like, oh, this is just because it's about like the character is Latina, and like that was the only connection. It had no connection to me personally. And like, you know, it can take a lot of courage, especially at the beginning of your career, to be like, I need to find a new rep. Like I need to find somebody who fully gets me. And it's so hard when you're in that early stage to have the, you know, the, I guess, bravery to leave a rep that's not doing their job right. But I think that it's like having that awareness that, you know, you kind of have to jump at that first chance to get in the door. You have to, like, getting that first rep is so important to, like, it's sort of like we're all in this big citadel with like a giant alligator filled moat around it. And like when someone's throwing you a rope down, like to let you in over the walls, like you kind of got to take it. But you know, once you're in the walls, you got to think like, is this rope right for me, or should I be trying to get on a
Yeah,
better
I mean,
ladder?
that's so funny because I think your first rep is kind of like your boyfriend or girlfriend in middle school. You know what I mean? It's like you're not gonna be with that person for life. You think
Unless you're
you will
really
be.
lucky. Some
I
people get
mean,
really
Well,
lucky,
Ben is
but
still in a middle
I'm
school
still with my high
relationship,
school
right? Like
sweetheart.
you're still,
yeah.
yeah. And
are
it's
you
going
really, Ben?
strong. It's going strong.
Ben, are you really?
Well, professionally. I'm not with my actual romantic.
I was supposed to be like, Ben, what is going on? No, look,
The first person I meet, I just say, I just can't quit anything.
that's fair. I think
No.
most of us, though, right? The middle school, high school relationship is not going to be your lifelong partnership. And you have to be okay with that. It's like your first chance to learn how to be in a relationship and, like, you know, lose your
And it
virginity
might
a little
work
bit.
out. It might, but like
Yeah,
it might also not. And you have to kind of be aware that, you know,
yeah. You just have
yeah.
to go with it. And also, I think not only do people think is your relationship with, or not only is like the quality of your rep imperative, but I also think you are the biggest agent and manager for your career. I think the mistake people make is that like the agent and the manager is going to come in and now you have a career. It's like, no, now you have somebody who could maybe advocate for you and open up some more doors and make some difficult phone calls, but you still have to kind of be the captain of the ship in a lot of ways. And if you defer too much, I think that's when you kind of end up in a kind of
Yeah,
stasis.
power
Like
imbalance
yes,
too.
a power
Like, yeah,
imbalance as well. Like
yeah,
you have to be directing things. And I think early in our careers, it's so easy to like feel like we owe these people
yeah,
something. But the reality is they are taking money from my check.
yeah.
So
And I think
they
that's
work for
something.
me.
I think that's something like Roche is really good at. Is like I feel like I you're very like good at the hustle and like the getting your like you know getting your name out there and advocating for yourself. And I think a lot of writers like are, I mean, I'm generalizing here, but I think a lot of us are like nerds, whether or not we'll admit it. Like we were nerds. And I think a lot of writers are the kind of people who like we're comfortable being alone, like with our thoughts a lot. And like, or I guess uncomfortable maybe, but that's our job. It's to be alone with our thoughts a lot, like a neurotic personality types. And people who often like succeeded in structures like school, like or just like liked structures like school where there's a clear ladder of like a grade that you get, or like a like you get the gold star or the head pat from like the person above you. And this is a world where you have to go from that, like, and it's a big leap from like going from that structure where there's like external validation that you're still seeking, and understand that you have to also be an entrepreneur, which is like such a weird thing to do when you're an artist. Like you have to advocate for yourself, you have to sell yourself, and it feels like it's like a weird, it's something that I definitely didn't feel at all prepared for when I came into the industry. And you learn how to pitch, and you learn how to sell yourself, and you learn how to like be confident in what is interesting about you. But it is interesting just because I think that there is a lot of expectation that that your rep is going to do all that work for you. And yeah, I mean, Roche is totally right that like they will vouch for you. They're basically like the person who's standing at your shoulder, like making you look legitimate. Like they're like they really do help you. Like they give you the stamp of like this person's allowed in this place. They give you the stamp on the hand to get into the cool person club or whatever that is Hollywood. But it's it's up to you in many ways.
I think like piggybacking off a couple things that were just said, that it is surprising how much of writing in this career is not writing. I'm like, oh, I'd love to write and do that. And then even when I'm on a show and I'm gonna write like 2 episodes in the season, it's like, okay, 2 weeks I went off and like wrote my script, but for the other like 5 months, I'm having conversation. I'm learning how to like build ideas collaboratively. It's selling yourself. It's advocating. Like there's so much that's not just
Yeah.
you and your keyboard once you're doing the job, and like you have to
Pitching.
like learn pitching exactly. And it's kind of like a surprising thing of like, oh, I love to write. It's like, oh, but there's 90% other that I'm having to learn. And or writing is not simply just in front of your computer. There's all these other parts of writing. And then in terms of the agent and like representation thing, like I thought it was like a really good reminder. 2 years ago, all writers who were in the WGA fired their agents as part of like an agency campaign we did. And it was like a little bit, I think, and everyone, has their opinion on it. And like, it was harder and easier for people depending on, I don't know, a lot of circumstances. But it was a time where I found where it was like, it was like a reminder that you had to advocate for yourself a little bit again, and that there are other writers. And I felt like, at least for me in that period, there was a lot more like talking to other writers and sense of community, like even though it was difficult at times, that I did connect a lot more with other writers during that time. And I think that it should be normalized asking writers for help, or like doing your own footwork and like kind of, and like being your own agent or rep and like hustling for yourself. And like all of us at some point, I think, have benefited from the generosity and help of other writers. And you ideally remember that and help other people in the same way, and kind of like have this normalization of helping other writers as opposed to just outsourcing all of that work to others.
So you all really kind of mentioned just this, I don't know, not self-starter aspect, but relying on your community and all of your relationships and not just this one person or this one, team to get you to work, but also so much that involves not actually writing. Like,
Mhm.
can we talk about some about this pitching, and constantly pitching, either pitching in the writer's room or pitching for development? Just can you tell us more, tell our lovely
Yeah.
audience more about this?
I mean, I think I spend more time working on pitches than I do on scripts sometimes.
Mhm.
I mean, pitching yourself, pitching projects, I think both of those things are pretty much relevant to your everyday career as a writer. Um, I can say, like, pitching yourself in terms of all these meetings that you'll take, and really kind of knowing who you are and having a bio that is concise and being able to communicate with people, like who you are, what makes you special, what makes you stand out, why you may be someone worth investing time, energy, or collaborating with. That's a huge part of your everyday career as a writer. And then there's the practical aspects of like pitching a project to a studio, to a network, to producers, and being able to understand the project from not just only like the nuts and bolts of it, writing wise, but like, why is this project relevant? Why is it relevant to the marketplace? How could you market this? Like all of those things, these skills that no one teaches you
Yeah.
in when you're learning how to write a script, right? Like those are the things that you're doing constantly. And so for me, I think, there's a lot of emphasis on learning how to write scripts and make movies and make TV shows and things like that. But there's not a lot of talk about like, oh, how do you pitch yourself in a meeting? And I was a mentor for a film festival a couple weeks ago, and my mentee mentioned that she was a coda, right, a child of deaf parent, and she never told me that when we first sat down, right, and she was giving me her elevator like introduction, and I was like, you can never do that again. Like every time you meet people, when you go, you sit down for a general, you should tell people that because a lot of her work has to do with the fact that there are the characters are people who do not feel heard. Literally, as a child of deaf parents, right? Like that kind of ties everything up, right? So that's something that I'll always remember now when I think about her. And so you have to learn how to pitch yourself, right? And she didn't think that was interesting or
Mhm.
worthy of mention, but I was like, absolutely. Like when you are pitching yourself to people, those little things, like those little biographical details, like are the things that make you stand out. And for me now, if I ever have a project where there's this thematic like exploration or it involves like deaf parents or deaf kids or whatever, this is somebody I could refer to, right? I can go to her and say, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to work on that? So that's a part of pitching yourself that we overlook as writers, is like who you are as a person
Mhm.
is integral to you being able to build a career as well.
Yeah, and I think also you learn over time to like pull different versions of yourself depending on what who you're talking to. That makes sense. Like, which sounds kind of strange maybe, but like I like to work in different genres. So like, if I'm pitching something comedy, I will talk about certain aspects of myself that I know are like weird or funny or like maybe I'll if I know I'm talking to someone nerdy, I'll talk about my fan fiction background or I'll talk about the fact that when I was in 8th grade, I literally learned Elvish literally from Lord of the Rings. So if I'm talking to like someone nerdy, I can do that. If I'm talking about sci-fi, like I love to write sci-fi things. I can talk about that stuff that I like to do. I love video games, like I can talk about that. I love my fantasy, like my great grandmother was a curandera. Like I don't know, like uh there's so many aspects of you that are interesting and you kind of have to just understand how like your story is interesting and like also if you're not interesting, get more hobbies. If you're really like do something interesting, because I really do think that a lot of writers like you can tell when writers fall into the trap of like they just all they do is just watch movies and then you're just kind of regurgitating things that you've seen in movies, and like you have to live your life a bit so that you can have something to say about the world.
Yeah, I feel like it was a surprise. When I first started taking meetings, I thought they were all going perfectly fine, and then I get kind of this wake up call from my agent. It was just like I had a couple agents, and like this was like the higher up one, who not my point person, who I didn't normally talk to, and like she just calls in. She's like, Ben, we got to improve your general meeting. So I'm like, what? I thought it was going. It's like, okay, here's the deal. I talked to everyone. They like you, but they're forgetting you. And I'm like, oh, okay, like harsh, but thank you. I need to hear this. And it was kind of like, I want you to go home right now and just write 10 interesting facts about yourself. Just do as an exercise. And there are things that like, and as I was doing that, it felt like I was then, maybe as you're kind of saying, like going into meetings and being like a little false, because I don't think these are like the most important things about me. But like, for example, I grew up on a farm, as in like we had pets that were horses and goats and chickens. And as a kid, I'd like collect eggs and like take the horses out and stuff like that. And that was just like, I never think about that ever. But I'm like, I should probably let executives know. Like, even they're not going to do a farm story. It's like, oh, you know who we met? We meet like 10 people a day. There was that guy who lived on a farm as a kid and then like went on to study like 21st century technology in college, and then like lived in a house with his grandparents and down the street from his other set of grandparents. Like these details that feel so basic to yourself, like can be interesting. I just want to like reemphasize that. And then I feel like I gained a lot more confidence in meetings, like knowing what you're meeting on and like kind of building up a little bank of stories. Like, okay, as you're saying, like this is a sci-fi thing. Here are like 4 stories that, you know, in the course of this conversation, ideally the conversation flows really naturally and I hit all the things I want to talk, but like I have this little like thing I wrote beforehand that I'm like, okay, when I go in, if I can hit 3 of these stories during my conversation or like steer the conversation this way, I'll be golden. I'll leave there knowing I might not get the job, but I did my best to like make them understand who I am and why I might be an interesting and good match for their project. And I just felt like much more prepared. And it was honestly like I learned so much about myself, just like taking a few minutes to like evaluate my own personality and history in a way that I don't normally.
Yeah, and that's something that is such an important part of the early stages of your career and the mid stages is you spend so much time, especially in the early part, just doing general meetings. And general meetings, you don't know what a general meeting is. It is just a meeting where you are meeting somebody, generally, like you not on a specific project. You are just trying to make a good impression and get to know them too. And like I would say, you know, if you're going into your first general meetings, don't forget to ask them questions about themselves too, because you'd be surprised where you find like really surprising common ground with people. Like, you know, you might find out that you like literally grew up in the same place, or that you have this weird connected, like I met someone who I originally went to school I wanted to be an archaeologist because I was obsessed with The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser, not the Tom Cruise one, the 1999 Mummy. And like I wanted to be an archaeologist and I studied ancient Egyptian, and like I'm surprised at how often I meet people who are like, "Oh my god, I love that movie and I also wanted to be an archaeologist." I'm like, I don't know, you just be surprised at how like these things that you're like, I don't know if people will find this interesting. You're like, "Oh my god, there are people out there who have the same weird interests."
Giving good general is what I like to call it, because I feel like there is yet to give good general, and I feel like the that is so key to it is I make it a conversation. You know, I actually prefer Zoom generals because I get a window into your one that's convenient. I mean, there's nothing better than being at
It's
home.
so great not having to drive.
I'm good on, I will never do an in-person general, to be honest, when the world opens back up for real. But I love it because I can look in their background and I'll see a poster like, oh, you have a Grease poster, and I'll start talking to you about Grease and how crazy it is that you have that poster in your house. You know, you can use this as an opportunity to like have conversation. And I think a lot of times we get focused on pitching ourselves, which is important, and knowing those kind of key details, but also like just being a person is also a huge part of being a writer that people forget about.
Yeah. And I think also too, just making sure when you're having those first meetings with either executives or agents or anybody, to like just be passionate about, like, just express your passions. Like, you know, don't be negative about, like, it's one of those things of like, you know, you never know what people have worked on, so like don't shit on anything, and like just be positive and be passionate and share what you're passionate about, because that's like what people are going to remember you for, is the things that you really love and that you really seem to care about.
My favorite general I had in the last couple months, one of the shows that this network covered, like, they're developing, and TBD if it'll get made, like, has ghosts in it. Like, there's an element of ghost. And instead of like talking about like the script and the characters and like what they're doing, it was just like, sorry, has anyone here like had an experience with a ghost? And we just spent like, it was 4 of us, and we just like spent like 20 minutes just telling ghost stories from our life. And I was like, that was heaven. I loved that. Like, that was, of course I'll always talk story and like where these characters go, but like just like stopping for a second. And ideally it's like a fun time for you, but like for them it's like, oh wow, that was like a fun 20 minutes, and like hit it off with that person, and I'll always remember it. And like that was a little different than 95% of the meetings I have, or something like that. I feel like is the goal. Give good general.
Mm-hmm.
G3. Awesome. Okay, so it sounds like to be a writer, you need to have social skills. Yes, have some hobbies. Okay, and so okay, you're in these meetings, you get staffed, and it may be different for you, Katie. I don't know if you went from the having screenplays, shorts, and then getting.
Yeah, I got staffed after, like, so when we were in the episodic lab at Film Independent, and I got staffed right after that. So like it was after I made a short film. I had been in the Universal Fellowship for features, and then I think when I was in the features program, I realized that features are really hard for baby writers. Like studio features is like, I was like, what am I doing? I came here to make things, not to write things that end up in people's drawer in a stack. So yeah, so I kind of went back to like making shorts after that, and then I got staffed on TV because I realized that TV is amazing. So.
Why do you feel like the features, as like getting started out, is harder than?
Because so in television there is a structure, a hierarchical structure, where they have a staff writer position that is meant for young writers, and it is meant for young writers to learn, and you're meant to kind of like learn and find your way up the chain once you're in that room. If you're a studio writer, they are taking multi-million-dollar risk on your script. So like it's just less likely that they're going to do that. They're just going to place this giant bet on you by yourself. It's just like it's unfortunate that many of the studios they have like a bucket of writers that they know, that they have relationships with, that are typically like have been around a really long time, and like even if they're not necessarily doing anything like super different or exciting, they're reliable. So they're like the people that they turn to. This is a very relationship driven business, so it's just like a lot harder to even just get them. Studio film is a very risk averse business.
Yeah, I was about to say, have you seen a studio film?
Yeah, they're like,
Lord, it looks like it's written by 55 people.
It's like committee.
It's a committee, and it's not
an algorithm.
It's not like the most creative or interesting, and also takes forever to get movies made.
It takes forever, and like and I think that like things are changing a bit because of streamers, and I actually think that streamers are a really good opportunity for writers, for like young new writers to they're making those small and medium-sized movies that the bigger studios aren't really taking risks on anymore at all. Like, and I think that's how the movie that we just got made. Is it was a risky movie, and it was made for like a medium budget. We're very fortunate, but it's very difficult to go into the studio. Like I was in a fellowship at Universal Pictures, and they like, if you look at the movies that they make a smaller number of movies now, and they're all just like huge tentpole like action sort of or family movies. So there's just fewer jobs in the giant studio movie space, and then television is so it has its pros and cons. Obviously, if you are somebody who doesn't like working with other people, television will probably be miserable for you. But if you like working with other people, then it's great. Like it can be a great opportunity to learn and to grow as a writer, and you do spend most of your time sitting there coming up with ways to solve problems. Like it's a lot of problem solving, and it's a lot of fun just to sit there and be able to pitch with cool people that you like. And if you're lucky, you'll have a room that's like nice and welcoming and warm. If you're unlucky, you might have have a you know, there are also rooms that are not great, and that can also be a bonding experience in itself. Like I was in one room that shall remain nameless that was not the best experience, and I still talk to those people because we bonded over how miserable we were. And you know, yeah, so it television is great for having like a path forward as a young writer and getting the opportunity to be on sets and meet people and yeah, make something.
Bonding over trauma. Yes.
That's
Well-
how most of your career will be.
Oh no.
Just gonna let you know very clearly.
Honestly,
To the good
yeah.
therapist.
I think that like we're fortunate that we're coming into the industry at a time where there's a lot more. I think that like it's interesting and telling to me that a lot more, I think, millennials who are like executives now or like producers have policies that are like, we do not work with assholes, like, and whether they like that's their ideal, and the fact that that's like that has to be a policy is just telling of what the industry has been and is aspiring to be better than. But like we're not fully out of that yet, but it's nice that we're trying. So
yeah, there are a lot of producers who are like, by the way, yeah, as the meeting's ending, like, we have a no asshole policy over here. And I was like,
they literally will say that.
Good.
That's literally a
I get, like, of course, like, you should, right?
yeah, but it's
But
funny
yeah.
that they say that to young writers. It's like, we're not the people who are going to be assholes. You know, yeah. So yeah, and it is really difficult too. Like when you're a young writer, it's very easy to you're vulnerable, you're exploitable, like in some ways, and it's helpful to know know the rules. And you like if you become a staff writer on a show, you have the Writers Guild, which, you know, like they have policies that they have, they're basically ways they can help you if you get into issues. They have resources where you can reach out and like ask for guidance. And it's nice to, you know, it's nice to have a community of writers that you can like reach out to if you need to.
My very first staff writing job, it was my first time in a writer's room, and I didn't know what to expect. And I like had I was like fully prepared for like you're joining a sorority or fraternity. I'm like, I'm gonna get hazed. I'm gonna get like bullied. I'm prepared to do it. And I was like, that's fine. Like, whatever. That's like, I'm steeling myself for this. My job is just to like be the punching bag in the room. And then it was the complete opposite. It was like the most nurturing thing. And this is, you know, only my experience, but like, it was like grad school. I was like, holy shit, I'm learning so much. They use words and like, they have terms for the things that I've been thinking. Like, oh, that is, in some cases, it's like, oh, it validated my thought process because this is how I would approach story, or like, this is how I think an act break should kind of be constructed, and it's like, oh, there's a vocabulary and language, and like, that's so great to know, and like reaffirm my instincts. Or it's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, or that wasn't something I've been thinking, and you think differently than me, and that's so helpful. And in this case, this was on Trophy Wife. It was like a room of like all high-level writers. I was the only like baby writer in the room, and they were definitely like empowering to me, like let me write scripts, like be on set, learn. And I don't like take that for granted, but I do think that's like the ideal situation for a young writer, is that everything is not put on you. Mm-hmm. There is that space to learn. And then ideally, I mean, they're paying you a lot of money, like they want you to contribute, but like, you know, once you kind of have settled in, hopefully in a way, when you're a higher level writer, it is kind of like expected, like you haven't spoken in a while, like why not? Like we're counting on you to move everything forward. You have a little bit of a safety net as a lower level writer of like, no one is like looking at you expecting you to be carrying the load and like doing everything.
Yeah, it's not your show.
Yeah.
I think that like that's right. The thing you have to learn too, is that if something's going wrong, like don't panic. It's not your fault. You know, things, it's always, you know, so when like my first staff position, I actually had a great time. Like the room was like, everyone was just so lovely. And the people, the showrunners were a lot of times like, yeah, if they've staffed you, they believe in you and they want to hear your voice and they want to they want to hear what you say. If you're young and if you're one of the young people in the room, you also should understand your position of power as like like your young voice is like the audience that they want to be watching the show usually. That's like a coveted point of view. So, you know, I think that I've seen staff writers before get really shy and kind of clam up and like be nervous to pitch. And, you know, you kind of have to understand that, you know, what you have to say is valuable. I guess if, you know, if you don't have something to say that's valuable, then maybe just go do some homework and try to find something to say that's valuable. But, you know, like don't, you kind of have to, yeah, just make sure you're not, I think sometimes it can be easy to operate from a point of fear of like oh no, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I like, that pitch didn't get chosen? Does that mean I messed up? It's like, no, things don't get chosen all the time. You just, it's like, it's in service. You're working in service of making a story, like a greater overarching story. If you're in serialized television, it has so many moving parts and you have to keep all those in line. If you're working in comedy, it's like, you have all these different jokes and some things have to get cut and some things have to move, and you just have to kind of be willing to, you know, understand that you pitch something, don't take it personally if it doesn't get chosen. Just, you know, you're working together in service of the greater story.
So you all, yeah, have definitely touched on, you know, you're in the room, you're a staff writer, make sure you contribute. Don't sit in the corner and being quiet. But are there any mistakes you've seen writers make in the writer's room, or, you know, things you've learned and that you've
How
taken?
long is this panel?
Yeah.
Top five things.
Top five. I mean, I think writers make a lot of mistakes. It's a bunch of people who are neurotic and different levels of talent all in one space. There are definitely a lot of mistakes. I think for the newbies, I think the mistakes I've seen are, I think sometimes fading too far into the background. I mean, because yes, some rooms are hierarchical. There are some rooms where you're not expected to speak. If you're, and the more opportunity you have to speak is based on your ranking, right? So, but then there's also, you know, rooms that are not like that. And I've actually encountered more rooms that are not like that than, you know, the ones where there's the hierarchy. So you kind of have to read the room. So not reading the room, fading too much in the background. And I also think like, I think that sometimes people do too much too. I've also seen people come in like trying to solve a whole, huge story problem as a staff writer. And it's like, that's not your job. I guarantee you, like, people may want to hear your pitches on it, but you don't need to have 5 pages of notes on that because there's like a co-EP or supervising producer who's probably going to solve it. And they may get annoyed that you have 5 pages worth of notes, right? So there's all sorts of like, they're like, it's all about
politics.
kind of just the politics, right? Like, and it really is about literally reading the room and understanding what room you're in and like playing your position. Because some rooms, all you need to do to succeed is to say 2 things every day that make sense. You know what I mean? And then some rooms you have to come in and like, you have to bring it every day and you have to figure that out. And so it's kind of hard for me to say like what the mistakes are because the mistakes are different for each experience.
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, but I do think there's certain things like, yeah, don't underperform. And listen. I think those 2 things will make your experience like you'll survive in any room if you are doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're listening and you don't have all the answers. I think in the beginning, your job is to really soak it all in and listen to these people who've been doing this for longer than you have. And if you can do that and do a good job with when it comes time for you to write something, you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think that's totally, yeah. I think like when I think of some of the mistakes like I made as a staff writer, I think, you know, one of the mistakes I definitely made was like getting very just like emotionally wrapped up in like fixing things, and like if the showrunner decided to go another way, I was like, oh my God, like that's not gonna work. And like just being like stressed out that it was gonna destroy things that we had like been talking about doing down the road. But like you kind of have to just let go because it's at the end, it's like it's not your show. And it's your, I think I will say, like, I am somebody, like, I am pretty aware of, it's good to be aware of your own flaws and like your own tendencies. I know for a fact I am not a good person to have in a hierarchical room. Like, I will not shut up. Like, I can't bring myself, if I think something is I'm the kind of person who, if something, one of my pet peeves in television is when if you have and this kind of comes from, I guess, just like the like, I don't know, like my history sort of like studies, but I get annoyed at the trope of torture is fine if the good guys are torturing a bad guy. Like, torture is like cool if you're torturing information out of someone who's a villain. Like, and I hate that, because like you're talking to people and like I'm very much of the mind that like we need to be responsible as writers for the messages we're putting out into the world. And like, if you're a person who believes that like, torture is bad and actually doesn't produce results on a scientific basis, which is like, has been thoroughly studied and has been proven that torture does not produce good intelligence, even if it's the good guys torturing bad guys or whatever, then you shouldn't put that in your stories and advocate for it and make it cool. Like, we have power as storytellers. And so I'm somebody who's very aware that like, if something like that is happening, I'm going to say something, because I can't not do that. And I tell people, like, I've gotten to the point, I guess, in staffing meetings where I can just tell people stuff like that. I will say, like, I will always say, like, if I think that something is like a bad message to put out into the world, because I think our, stories are powerful. And obviously you don't want to go like overboard and like be nervous about things. Like, it's not about being a risk averse, but like, I think it's good that's a little bit, maybe once you're past your staff writer position, like once you've gotten to know a little bit more about yourself. But like, some people are going to be really happy to have that, and some people probably are going to be like, okay, maybe we shouldn't go with this person, she seems a little intense, and I think that's fine. I think once you've gotten your first job and you've gotten your foot in the door, getting your second job is actually, it's kind of a sad thing to say that like, once you've gotten your first job, it doesn't mean your career is fully set either. Like, you have to keep on hustling. You just have to keep on struggling, and you have to, and part of the hustle is knowing who you are and what you want out of a show, and what you want to be making, because you are not going to be, if you are miserable in a room because like you don't fit with the culture of the room, they're not going to like that, and they're not going to reward that, and you're not going to like it either, and you're not going to feel fulfilled. So like, knowing what's important to you is, if like you are if you are perfectly happy working on like on a show that just like cranks out like popcorn, like, that's amazing. You should do that, and you shouldn't do a show that's going to make you miserable because you have to go home and do like 15 hours of research on this like very obscure thing. Like, you shouldn't do that to yourself. So knowing yourself is important, and what careers you want. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I think that the two of you covered a lot of stuff that I would have mentioned about, being a staff writer in the room. The only ones I'd maybe add, and this might follow into what has already been said, but I think it's always mentioned, probably most people watching this have heard, but like, don't over pitch an idea when it has failed. Like, and this goes for any level, but like, if you pitch something and it doesn't work, like, again, don't take it personally. People have said decisions have to get made. You only start drawing attention to yourself when you pitch your same idea multiple times. Maybe a day from now, you still have the problem, and now people like return to your idea, or someone else pitches your idea again. Like, you know what, like, there was that idea that was mentioned yesterday that maybe works. Like, that's all fine, but especially as a low level writer, don't keep kind of like digging your heels in that way. I would say, don't be negative. Like, the room will get down sometimes. You'll get frustrating notes calls sometimes. You'll get like, I don't know, things will fall through. Like, I think the last thing the room wants is the staff writer just like being loudly angry and negative or whatever. Like, you can feel down and you don't have to then solve everything, but you should have like a positive energy. Like, we want to be like moving forward, and that goes for any writer. But I feel like, unfortunately, some of these rules are like
judged more harshly if you're a younger writer. But I would say, like, in general, like, be a positive force in the room that is like moving forward. But I think especially if you're a younger writer or like newer writer, don't be negative. And I think Rashay was like totally spot on about like listening and learning, because each room is different, and like what writers in the room are either just like doing stuff in general that's successful, or like who in the room is succeeding at like getting through to the showrunner, like who, or unsuccessfully. Like you can learn just as much being like, why was that pitch failing, or why is that succeeding, and then and kind of emulate and like incorporate the things you're noticing. And I'd say on top of that, if you can, obviously you want a good relationship with your showrunner, but your showrunner has a million different people pulling them in different directions. So you can't always expect to like spend all this time with them. I'd say like a second thing you could do is like, who are some of the upper level writers in the room that you just like naturally connect with? That like during lunch, you like realize you have the same interests, or you pitch similar, you have similar like values and ideas. And if you can befriend them in a way that like you can go to them as someone you trust, like, hey, how do you think I'm doing? Is something I should know or learn? Or I just wrote a story area for my episode. Do you mind just like taking a look at it before I turn it in? If you had anything that you spot that it should adjust, I think that's totally valuable, just to have someone check you that you trust, and who you think can like help your own performance. Because yeah, at the end of the day, the job is to like do the best job for your showrunner and find those people who can kind of course correct you and steer you in a way that you feel comfortable.
You all are just sharing all of the nuggets. I hope people are furiously writing down, typing up everything you all are sharing. Okay, so have you all found in these rooms that they are becoming more diverse, more women, more BIPOC people? I mean, what's the temperature? What is the climate right now?
Oh.
We're like, it's funny because
Yeah.
I feel like you hear people talk about it all the time, but in practice, all the rooms I've been in have been majority male and majority, like vast majority white. And like, I think I've been in one room where it was like 40% women, but it was still like 80% white. So I don't know, it's like an interesting thing, just, and that like it is tough because like any person who is not white it can be put in a position of having to be like the like, I guess the police officer of like whether something is okay to say, if that makes sense. Like you end up being the person everybody's like, is this okay? Like you're like, I mean, I can give you my opinion.
Right.
But you know, it's interesting that I think that like certain there are more shows that are like, I mean, I've heard that there are more shows that have like better rooms, but the rooms that I've been in have still been majority and they're not very diverse, but you know.
I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, to
Yeah.
Katie's point, I've been in diverse rooms, but mostly also because I get hired to write Black things because I'm Black, and that's all I can write apparently. And so what ends up happening is, you know, yes, on those shows you'll find more Black people, and I've also seen some Black shows where most of the writers have been white. I haven't seen that in a little bit, but that has happened too. So I do think there's some change. There are some changes. My issue with the industry is beyond the diversity of the writers' room. I think that to me is a very micro conversation. I think the macro conversation is more so like it's beyond like what are the compositions of these rooms. I actually don't mind if they're all white writers' rooms. There's some shows I don't think you need necessarily diversity because the show is ridiculous and it's about like a very specific white perspective. I don't care if a Black person's writing on that. My issue is, can we have some diversity of shows? And can we have diversity in terms of the people who have the power to greenlight shows? And that to me will change the composition of these rooms. Once you start to have different kinds of diversity reflected, if you have shows about people who are differently abled, right, then you're gonna, and that showrunner and creator is someone who's in a wheelchair, then I'm sure that person will hire people with disabilities in the room, right? So to me, it's not just about like these faux diversity efforts And then there's also issues not only in terms of the composition of what these broadcasts and cable streaming networks are putting out there. It's also not just about like hiring a bunch of lower level people of color who have no power. And that's what I'm also seeing a lot of is like, yes, it's really easy to break in at right now as a person of color, I think. But once you get to a certain point, that's where it gets difficult when it comes to like upper level and when it comes down to show running, right? That's where you start to see real gaps. So diversity, sure, there's definitely more people of color in the industry now writing than ever before. But like, if we were to even talk about studio films, I mean, how many Black, Latino, Asian people are writing studio films? I can guarantee you that this year they'll probably be fit on two of my hands. I only have two hands, but they'll fit on those two hands, right? Like, that's it. So there's a real gap. And I think this industry loves to celebrate bullshit. Like, it likes to pretend that it's like, you know, this year we nominated 4 people with a tan, so we're doing something. But there's a lot of like, it's decoration to me. It's not substantive, and it's not actually like moving things forward. But that being said, I think we do have some strides, right? For sure. That's not to discount where we are. This is the best time ever in the history of Hollywood to be a person of color or to be someone who considers themselves to be diverse. I'll say that for sure.
I think my observations are, I think, largely similar. I guess I skipped this in like getting my first job, but in that story, like my first job, actually my first 2 jobs, I was paid out of the studio's diversity fund, and like not gonna like look a gift horse in the mouth, but like it is one of those things, as Rochelle, you're saying, like there are lots of means and an effort to like get diverse writers in the door. It's like, but the retention and the continued promotion is like, it's lagging behind.
And it's kind of fucked up too. Sorry for language, but if that's not, but sure. It's one of the weird phenomenons that the diversity initiatives create is it's this, I mean, it's great to obviously want diversity, but then you end up with this weird position where sometimes, so I used to work for a diversity initiative. Like my first job in Hollywood when I was in grad school was working for a diversity program at a network, and you would have showrunners calling, and like there would be a staff writer that they just like who is diverse, and they would be like, will you pay for this person? And like kind of with the implication of like, oh well, we're just not going to hire them if you don't pay for them, like out of the diversity. I mean, it's like, you know, it was a weird position of like, there was a person who was in one of our programs, and another network called, and because she was in the program at our network, and another network called and said, well, like, will you pay for her to be on our show because she's in your program, and like we're just not like, you want her to be hired, right? It'll help your program success. And they were just like, they had to be like, you like her, hire her, like,
pay her. You have the money.
Pay her,
Yeah.
like as a writer on the show. And so it ends up like you end up with this weird like dynamic of the money is like, I don't know, there's something kind of like messed up about like it's a good like initiative to have, but it can be abused in a way, and that makes me uncomfortable. But I mean, and I was I was fortunate enough to have like my agent was, I had one agent who was a woman, and she was a Black woman, and like that's a rarity in the industry to have like a person of color as your agent who is also a woman. It's like there aren't that many. And I think like because I was lucky to have a rep that understood, like, I don't know, like that it's important to also to make sure that your client, like to protect your client and make sure that they're not just being seen as the person to fill that slot. Cause it can be tough to like, to be like, I don't know, some rooms are great, and some rooms, I've had friends who've been in that slot before who've basically said like, you're kind of being treated almost like a fellow or something. But I mean, yeah, there are also exceptions obviously. And then there are that treat you like anybody else. So
these are my own statistics, and it's a small sliver of the Hollywood pie, but like I've worked on 8 shows, and all 8, the creators or showrunners, or all the creators were white. And but like some, I'd say on the shows that were created by women, there would be the lead oftentimes would be a woman. The representation in the room of writers, much higher percentage of women, like sometimes like 50-50. When I like a queer show creator, like I'd find the representation in the room to have more like queer diversity. And so I do think maybe it's your standard share, like the decision maker, those who are empowered, like there is that trickle down effect both to what happens on the screen and behind the camera. In my small sliver of the pie first person experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it definitely needs to come from the top down.
Yeah. And there's a lot of resentment. I was quoted with I had a very aggressive quote in an article a couple months ago about diversity, because it was a right-wing article, and it was about how diversity is like making white men's life like difficult because they have to be respectful, and they have to, and they were saying how they were afraid to give writers of color notes and things like that. And the whole thing is, that's why I say I don't actually need people of color to be on every show, because that's not the issue. The issue is that we have a lack of opportunity in general. And so my whole thing is like the stories that are being told are so limited as they are now, like that it's not a true reflection of the narrative opportunity that we have in this world, right? And it's not good business. But there's a reason why it continues to be the way that it is. And we just have to be honest, like even in this conversation, we don't want to say the word, but it is interesting to me how many navel gazing shows we have about white guys and white people. And yet, like we had Insecure for, I think, was it 4 or 5 seasons? And any Black person who went out and pitched a show about 2 Black female friends or 3 Black female friends, it became, well, we already have Insecure. It's not even on your network, right? So that's the thing that is really frustrating to me, is like, I think that's where the conversation for me is. I've never pitched to a Black person who could green light a show. I've pitched to Black people who could ask their boss to maybe green light a show. I've never pitched to a Latinx person who could green light a show. Never pitched to an Asian person who could do it. And so like there's that's where things I think have to change.
Yeah.
Is at the top in terms of who, and then also I'll say this, it gets even grittier. I'll get even to the minutia here. Even the people of color who are in this industry, it's a certain pedigree, right? There's certain, the kind of Latino and Black and Asian folks who are in this industry, Black people who are here, it's not your cousin, it's like who's from the projects, right? It's the Black people who are running shows went to Harvard, right? So even the kinds of stories that the people of color are telling are also coming from a very limited perspective. And that's also the industry. I literally had a boss tell me, well, yeah, the industry loves Black Ivy League showrunners, right? That's what they love. Those are the people they trust and believe can run a show. And so there's so many layers to this conversation. And we just started, I think, in the past 5 years, having the very surface level conversation. People aren't ready for that one. They're not ready for the classes and within people of color and who gets to tell the stories of people of color. We're not even ready to have that conversation yet, because we're still talking about the fact that there are still shows with 90% of the people are white men, right?
Well, let's go there, and I hope it's not a fantasy world, but let's think futuristic. You all each are showrunners of your own shows. What are the voices you're looking for? What are the room? How does this writer's room look like? Not just, identity wise, but what are the voices you're looking for? And yeah, who do you want in the room? Who do you want pitching to you? Advocating for others? No hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it would just be looking at people who connect to the story that I'm telling. And, if I'm telling a story, it's probably going to be about if I'm running a show, I'm probably going to run something that's fairly based on some aspect of myself. You know, I think that all writers, we write about some aspects of ourselves. And, you know, it'll probably be a trickle down effect of like, you know, I mean, it really depends on the show, obviously, but like, yeah, I think that like the diversity I would hope would happen naturally, just because like if I'm writing something that's set in like 1950s Los Angeles, like I'm gonna want to talk to people whose families lived here like at that time. If I'm writing something set in the future, I want to talk to nerds. And like I mean I really I think that there's a lot of opportunities too for mentorship, that like, you know, the classism thing is real. It's a thing that like, you know, I was fortunate enough to go to some really great schools and like get scholarships to go to really great schools. And I try to like, I think it's like, it can be tempting to only ever give back to those schools. Like people want to give back to the programs where they were an alum and like they're already so well established and they have so much money and they have so much funding. Like, no, we should be going to community colleges here. We should be going to the communities who actually have no funding and like and be giving people the opportunities to be on sets, because there's a huge barrier. It's like, I think for a lot, I mean, going to Roche's point, like there is a huge, you know, if we're talking about like the like I have my metaphors for how Hollywood works. Like one of my metaphors that I like to talk about that's, you know, is it's like trying to swim across the English Channel, and like some people have to swim, and some people's parents have boats, and like they're on their dad's boat, like going across, like it's no big deal. And getting into like, when you're a person of color who comes from a underprivileged community, if you can get into an Ivy League school, that's at one level of vouching for that you've already passed, then like the industry will be like, oh, well, they're one of the ones that like they made it out already. They are acceptable. They are socialized. And like, you know, I'm kind of one of those people. Like I'm one of the people who, my family is from East LA. Like I grew up in like between East LA and the Inland Empire, like out in cow country. And, you know, my family, you know, did all right, but like I got to go. And I think that like if I look at my community, like I want to bring people up from my community too. So I mean, it's like a weird thing to think of like having that much power. I feel like it's hard for me to even imagine that. That's something that might actually happen, and I'm not just going to be scrapping to try to get something. You know, I think that all of us are like, when you have that level of power, that'll be great, and you get to think about what you get to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll out myself also as someone who like has had a lot of the pedigree that's like helped me. That like I'll say everything has been easier because people make it feels easier to take a risk when they don't feel like it is a risk. Like that's like 100%. And I think in terms of that like day, hopefully when I can have that like opportunity to staff a room, like I think my opinion on like good show running and hiring is that a showrunner should hire people who understand the tone of their show. Like for like, you don't want to like hire someone who's like going to, the boat needs to go one way. And if someone's like rowing the opposite direction the whole time, like even the most brilliant writer, it's like, well, this is just ruin everything. You need to like understand the tone and the mission. But like, I think a showrunner should understand that what they know and what they're good at, like they've already got that covered. So like you want to fill the room, populate it with people who have different interests, different expertises, and that can be all different types of diversity. Like don't need to like list them all, but like you should feel confident in your own expertise and your own like areas of strength. And when it comes to storytelling, you want to surround yourself with people who understand the goal and the tone. So you're not always having like, that's a nice joke, but it's not right for us. Or like, that's a fun story, but it would never be on this show. And then just bring with other people who's like, I would have never thought of that idea and I love it. And that's totally right. And it would not have occurred to me. So I think that's the goal. And I think the tough thing for writers and for hiring is that like, maybe you naturally like self-isolate in like-minded people. Like that's kind of like a natural societal thing. So part of that is on for like going back to reps, like if you have a show, like you need to be hounding those people to be like, put writers in front of me that I don't know, or like reaching out to other writers, like this is what I'm going for. You know what I'm about. Like who's all the people I don't know about yet? And so that's like you need to be proactive about, like, if you care about diversity, like to actually take some steps instead of just being like, well, these are the only people that were presented to me, so these are the ones I chose. Like these are the 5 people I've worked with, so I always work with them. Like you need to like kind of push yourself, obviously. But yeah, that's just kind of like the general ethos I have, is like find people who understand your tone, and then otherwise as little overlap as possible with you.
Yeah, I second, I mean, all of that. I think for me, I think there's a formula that's, each show has a different formula in terms of putting the room together, you know, and for me, I'm going to always think about, okay, what are the ingredients I need for this show to work? And then from there, how do I then look at my network and then like ask, as Ben saying, like ask folks like on the street, because also this is the other thing too, agents are a big barrier to this. Agencies have a list of 5 people they like in each category, and they ram those 5 people down everybody's throats, right? So they're always on the same list. And the thing is, like, you have to go beyond the agents, you have to go beyond the production company, you have to sometimes just ask people. That's why I'm a member of different, like, a quote unquote affinity groups, you know, Black women who write for television, Black women who write comedy. That's how you will find, like, you know, you'll post on those groups like, hey, I'm looking for blah, blah, blah. And that's how you can find interesting submissions, I think, as well. But I think for me at the core, it's personnel. It's what do you bring to the paper? Like, what am I reading? And what is your voice? But also, like, what's your personality? What's your point of view? You know, so for me, I like conflict, because I think conflict creates good stories. And what I mean by conflict, I'm not talking about like drama within the room. I'm saying conflict in terms of like, this person's voice is broader and this person's voice is very specific, and that can create a very interesting mix. So that's what I'm more interested in, right? It's like the personalities, the voices, and putting together the right kind of chemistry to make something special. And I think you can, when I watch shows where there's something so culturally specific and interesting, those are the shows I'm like, oh, right? Like, I wonder what that room looked like. I know there had to have been an Asian person in that room, a Black woman in that room for that joke to have happened, right? And that's what excites me. And so, like, I want to see more of that kind of, that's what I want to see ultimately in my rooms, is like that specificity and people bringing an interesting take to these stories.
I think like along those, this is a very specific example that just came to mind as you were talking, but I'm like, when you're saying like, oh, someone, that specificity, like on Only Murders, we like have 2 writers who's been all remote the last 2 years writing, like who are living in New York. So like this show's set in New York, and like I've spent a summer in New York. Like I don't know New York, but I love like when I'm writing a script or like we're breaking a story, I can like just reach out to that person and say like, this is the scene I'm working on, but like, what is the restaurant they were just at? Like, what is the grocery store they just grabbed this from? Like, what is the cross street? Like, what is a complaint that they have about the mayor that's playing on the radio right now? And they're like, hold on one second. They just send out like this long list of incredibly specific, like, this is what's on talk radio right now in the city. And I'm like, thank you. I'm putting that in the script right now. And like those levels of detail can be everywhere, but you're right. Like when you see it, and for maybe like 90% of people, it goes right over your head. But like when you have that moment where you're like, oh my God, that is correct. Like that's a really exciting thing as a viewer. And I think, yeah, as writers, we should be trying to find those things.
Yep.
Ben, I'm glad you mentioned Only Murders. I know in your free time you have your screens off, but if there's any show or film that you want to encourage the audience to watch or go see, please tell us. Yeah, what are you watching or what are you looking forward to checking out?
I just started watching The Staircase. Ooh, it's so good. And then it made me watch the documentary it's based off of, because I could not believe what I was watching. I was like, there's no way this happened. It is insane. So I highly recommend The Staircase.
I feel like this is already like everyone's recommending it, and by the time this airs, like it'll all be too late. But like Everything Everywhere All at Once, like a favorite movie I saw most recently. Just like so brilliantly creative and fun and energizing as a viewer. On TV right now, what am I watching? I just finished Our Flag Means Death, which I enjoyed, and I'm watching Ozark for the first time, and Better Call Saul.
Cool. I'm just gonna second. You stole my answers. Honestly, I loved Everything Everywhere All at Once. I saw it at South by Southwest, and I'm going to see it again, and it was so good. Like, that movie is wild and like shouldn't work. It operates on this level of just being, it's like the Daniels, but they're like at 11, and they maintain that 11 like the entire movie, and it shouldn't work, but it does. It's so great. And I loved Our Flag Means Death. I loved it. I thought it was just wonderful.
Okay, you all did no self-promotion, so
Oh, well, sure, I guess we can do that.
Emergency.
Oh yeah, so yeah, watch Emergency. It's on Amazon Video now. So yeah.
Roche, woke.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, you all. Only Murders been
Only Murders. June 28th, it's back. I think the first 3 episodes are premiering June 28th, and then subsequent like every week. Yeah.
All right. Final question. With everything that's going on with networks and streaming, we see movie theaters closing. What does the future of TV and film writing look like to you?
I think there are going to continue to be a lot of opportunities for this. I think it's just continuing to evolve and expand. I think stories, I know that Quibi failed spectacularly, but I didn't actually think it was a bad idea. I think it just launched at the wrong time. I think we're in an interesting time where there's so many different ways to see things and be engaged and plugged in. And so I think that stories, the way we tell stories are evolving. I was watching a TikTok documentary the other day, so I think there are a lot of opportunities. And I think if anything, the pandemic proved that people, when the world comes to a standstill, and if we have internet, we will watch things. So I think the future is bright, and there's a lot of opportunity to tell stories in different mediums.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that a lot of people are afraid because things are changing. And I love movie theaters, and I'm glad that they're still around. I don't think that they're necessarily going to go away entirely. But I also think that, like, I'm excited personally about the rise of streaming and the rise of movies. And I think that, like, for too long, because of the shift of big studio films to just be these huge tentpole films, it hasn't left much room for those small and medium-sized, like, risky movies. And so I think, like, streaming is doing things like that. So I'm happy about that. And I think with television as well, I'm personally, like, as someone who loves watching television, I really like streaming just because I like binging everything all at once. I think we all, I don't know, it's what we've gotten so used to. Like, I have 2 half sisters who are in high school right now, and they don't even understand the concept of live television. Like, they've never grown up with it. They have no idea how it works. The idea of a show airing 1 episode at a time is, like, very frustrating and, like, foreign to them. So I'm not necessarily afraid of the future. I think it's really exciting to have more places to tell more niche stories, more personal, different, experimental stories.
Yeah, I shouldn't have gone last because I'll be the one who's slightly downer. But I will also echo that as a consumer, I'm thrilled. Like there's so much, and I think you're right that like there is a lot more niche stuff being made. I'm concerned that like nothing seems to survive.
Mm.
Uh, like that's scary to me that everything's like a season and then done, and or now we're even like constructing stories with the intention that that's only going to be 3 seasons or 2 seasons. Like we're I don't know, like
I
defensively.
don't know.
No,
I think that's like I mean I personally just I think that so many stories, especially in television, have so much pressure to go on far too long. So there's something kind of nice about like knowing that your favorite showrunner who does this really interesting thing isn't going to be stuck on doing the same show and stretching it beyond its like it should have been a 3-season show and they stretch it into 7 seasons and it frees them up to do something else. But that's just my point. That's my opinion.
no, I guess that like, and I don't disagree with that. And I think like sticking an ending and like having one in mind is like good for storytelling. I think that it's too often like, well, 2 seasons have gone by and we've decided like we're only trying to get subscribers off you. So like now that we've like everyone, there's always like articles about Netflix, for example, like 3 seasons is like the maximum that it's gone because
Yeah.
like no new person is buying the service now for a show that's been around for 3 years and we're not doing ad revenue. So like unless you're winning us awards or you're Stranger Things, something like that, like, all right, time to go to like bring in new voices to like get new subscribers. Like that's a very cynical, but I also think like there's like a churn to that in a way where like in the past, it'd be like we could at least like point to numbers. Like it's like kind of all shrouded in a way where I don't know what success looks like, why we fail to succeed feels like a little out of our hands. As a consumer, I'm loving everything. There's so much I'm enjoying. I think this is just like going back to something Roche said earlier. I'm like a little concerned about the vertical integration and like the corporate mergers that are happening now. And
Yeah.
the way to like connect it to Roche's point is like, Roche, you're saying like, I've not pitched to someone who can make the decision, right? And the more that we consolidate, there are fewer people who are actually making decisions. I think like great to have like streamer. I love there are areas where that is incredibly democratic, but like in the big Hollywood ways, I'm worried that we might like contract, and there are fewer and fewer people making the decisions.
There will just be one streamer. And it will
Oh my God. Yeah, it's all gonna be one.
Max. And it will just be everything under one umbrella and it's gonna be chaos.
Yeah, I think as long as we like that's the thing. That's the one thing that I am hoping that we're gonna have to fight for. It's not gonna happen naturally, but you know, making sure that there is a diversity of companies that exist and that like because yeah, further media consolidation is just gonna it narrows the competition. It means that like yeah you have all these different places that you know like you know Roche, you were saying like you know we have Insecure like in the industry already and like imagine if everything is run by like 3 companies or 2 companies or 1 company. They can legitimately say that for like basically any type of show. They're like we have that one for everything. So yeah, I don't know, that's the one thing that's frightening, but we're not there yet. We're gonna have to fight against that.
Time.
There's still time. There's still more stories that need to be told. And I just want to thank you all so much. Thank you, KD. Thank you, Roche. Thank you, Ben. And we hope you all enjoyed this as much as we did. And as Roche said, please GGG, give good generals, and that you check out more virtual and in-person content during the Los Angeles Latino International Film Festival. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.